This is the start of modern America. You're going to use this to complete your guided notes. If you listen carefully, you can follow along with where we're at in the guided notes. We're going to start off with the beginning, modern America. The U.S. Supreme Court has changed over time. The decisions of the U.S. Supreme Court have expanded individual rights in the years since Brown versus Board. The membership of the Supreme Court has changed to include more women and minorities. The first woman to be appointed was Sandra Day O'Connor, and she was appointed by Ronald Reagan in 1981. She was the first female of the Supreme Court. She is no longer on the court. Second woman was RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She still serves on the Supreme Court, was appointed by Bill Clinton, and is an advocate for equal citizenship of men and women. Clarence Thomas is the second African American to serve on the Supreme Court, following Thurgood Marshall, nominated by H.W. Bush. He's a strict constitutionalist, believing that you follow the words of the Constitution, and there was some controversy around his appointment, including accusations of sexual harassment that he was accused of for one of his former employees. Moving on to number 1, how have the decisions of the Supreme Court promoted equality and extended civil liberties? The civil rights movement is what in the 40s, 50s, and 60s provided a model that other groups have used to extend civil rights and equal justice, including illegal immigration in the Plyer versus Doe case of 1982, stating that the court ruled that states may not deny public education to the children of illegal immigrants. Moving on to number 2, the U.S. Supreme Court protects individual rights enumerated into the U.S. Constitution, including the right of privacy. That's extended even into the states. Extended due process to the Bill of Rights. If they want to tap a phone, it has to go through due process, meaning you have to have a reason for it. States cannot confine citizens to an institution without treatment if they were non-dangerous and capable of living by themselves or with family. And finally, a public school must conduct a hearing before subjecting a student to suspension. That's still true to this day. If you are going to be suspended or expelled, there has to be a hearing first. Number 3, the U.S. Supreme Court identified a constitutional basis for a right to privacy that is protected from government interference, meaning the government cannot just investigate whatever they want to investigate. This is an extension of the Fourth Amendment, now more than just the right of search and seizure. A couple questions that had to be investigated or looked into. Can your garbage be searched if it's outside of your home? This was dealt with in California versus Greenwood. Can your property be observed from public airspace, as in Florida versus Riley? What is the reasonable amount of time before entering a private residence, Hudson versus Michigan? And can the government monitor our phone calls and email messages in the name of security, Hepting versus AT&T? Number 4, the U.S. Supreme Court invalidates legislative acts and executive actions that the justices agree exceed authority granted to the government officials by the Constitution of the United States. This is essentially an extension of Marbury versus Madison. So just a few facts on women and how they change the traditional workforce. This is not in your guided notes, but just some important information that I wanted to point out. We started to see women entering the workforce more in 1970s after LBJ's Great Society and taxes. And in order to keep up the standard of living, you needed to have 2 working parents or 2 working family members. We see that about 15 million women make less than $25,000 a year, which is significantly less than men make. Most of them with school-age children do work. Typically, women make about 77 cents nationally for every dollar that men make, despite being in similar jobs. Some comparisons of men versus women in the weekly pay by industry. And some issues that women face in the workplace is low prestige, low paying jobs typically, as well as a glass ceiling, a difficulty to move up in the world or in the workforce. Back to your guided notes for rising immigration. So we are on page 2. Rising immigration has increased American diversity and redefined American identity. New and increasing immigration to the United States has been taking place from many diverse countries, especially Asian and Latin American countries. Just to give you an idea of how immigration has changed in the United States. Why are people moving to America? Or why are people coming here? 1, for political freedom and economic opportunity. This just gives you an idea of where they're coming from and how many immigrated. Some issues related to immigration policy. It does provide a strain on some governmental services. Fulfilling low-paying jobs. Many immigrants do work low-paying jobs. Issues about border security and border safety debates. What is the best pathway to citizenship? Creating and providing effective bilingual education, as well as increasing cultural education for people coming from different cultures and bringing different cultural backgrounds. So the contributions of immigrants and what immigrants contribute to society. The popularity of ethnic food, diversity of music, arts, and literature, so exposing culture. Their important role in the labor force. And expanded source of scientists and engineers. Kind of a funny little graphic about illegal immigration and who was here first. Another one. All right, moving on. Dramatic advances in technology have affected life in America in many significant ways. The American space program was a triumph of American technological prowess. In the early 1960s, John F. Kennedy pledged to increase support for the American space program. The race to the moon continued through the 1960s. John Glenn was the first American to orbit the Earth. Neil Armstrong was the first person to step on the moon's surface in 1969. His famous quote was, "That's one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind." First woman to enter space was Sally Ride. Moving on to page 3. Over the past 3 decades, improved technology and media have brought about better access to communication and information in rural areas, businesses, and individual consumers. As a result, many more Americans have access to global information and viewpoints. Examples of technological advances. We had the space exploration, the space shuttle. So going into space, the Mars rover, which travels around Mars and collects data and information, Voyager missions, and the Hubble telescope. In communications, we have satellites, global positioning system, which is the GPS, and personal communication devices, which we all know as today as cell phones, as well as an increase in robotics. There's also been changes in work, school, and healthcare. People are doing more telecommuting, meaning working from home, or distance learning, so learning online or learning with the computer, not having to go into class. We've also seen a growth in white-collar career and service industry, and breakthroughs in medical research, including the development of the vaccine for polio by Dr. Jonas Salk. We've done a lot of outsourcing and offsourcing, meaning sending materials elsewhere to get made or created, as well as jobs. And moving on to the next one, the federal government has the ability to influence the United States economy. It bases its decisions on economic indicators such as the GDP, gross domestic product, exchange rates, inflation, and unemployment rates. The role of the Federal Reserve, government's role in economy, it's the government's responsibility to promote a healthy economy. A healthy economy is characterized by full employment and low inflation through the actions of the Federal Reserve. And they are in charge of monetary policy decisions and control the supply of money and credit to expand or contrast the economic growth. Fiscal policy decisions, President and Congress are responsible for fiscal policy decisions, determine the levels of government taxation and spending, and they also focus on government regulates the economy. Finally, the U.S. responses to terrorism has created increased security at home, or heightened security at home, the Patriot Act, providing appropriate tools required to intercept and obstruct terrorism. We have used both diplomatic and military initiatives to respond to terrorism. And diplomatic being government having conversations with other governments, and military being obviously sending in the Army or the Marines. And that is it for the very last standard.